good evening. This is what we call Stay Ready So You Don't Have to Get Ready. My name is State Representative Darisha Parker of the 198th District, and it is an awesome way to end our Women's History Month by talking about a subject that was very near to many people, and we're talking about student loan debt, especially as it's been affecting and continue to affect African-American women. It gives me the distinct honor to be here with my colleagues from our State House, our chairwoman of the Pennsylvania Legislative Black Caucus, Donna Bullock, and my other colleague, State Representative Morgan Cephas. Please give us remarks, Chairwoman.
Thank you, Representative Darisha Parker, the chair of our subcommittee on women and girls of color. Thank you for organizing tonight's conversation about Black women and student loan debt. As the chair of the Pennsylvania Legislative Black Caucus, it has been an honor for me to use this month of Women's History Month to not only celebrate the achievements of Black women, but to also look at policy solutions and conversations around how we can improve the lives of Black women. Tonight's conversation is timely. I will first recognize that both you and Representative Morgan Cephas have both written op-eds and opinion pieces about the impact of student loan debt on your lives and on the lives of many Black women here in the Commonwealth. And what we know is that Black women seek higher education, and with that comes higher student loan debt. And we like to know how that impacts our earning potential, our ability to provide for our families, take care of childcare and other issues. And I'm sure all of that will be discussed by today's panel. And I look forward to hearing from them. And once again, I want to thank you and Representative Cephas for your work and attention in this area. Thank you.
All right, Rep. Cephas.
Thank you so much, and good evening. As I stated, I am State Representative Morgan Cephas. I have the distinct pleasure of representing the 192nd Legislative District, as well as serving as the co-chair of the Women's Health Caucus. I want to thank, both of my sister reps for, leading the charge on not just having conversations to celebrate women as a whole in this month of March, but really elevating the issues that we are facing on the day-to-day, and talk about, yes, the progress that we've made collectively, but how much further we still have to go. And I'm sure it will be discussed throughout this evening, but student loan debt is a critical issue specifically for Black women. We're constantly having a conversation during the election cycles. Black women are the savior of the Democratic Party, are the savior of this country. But when we have electeds get into office, they don't necessarily, they invite us to the table, we pull up that folding chair, but they don't necessarily like for us to dictate the menu and dictate the agenda. And that's what tonight's conversation is about. When you see Black women still being paid 60 cents on a dollar here in Pennsylvania, but yet still holding the largest amount of student loan debt, we realize that there is an issue and there is a problem. And when we are holding on to that student loan debt, that is making us less economically viable here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, as well as our families. When you have significant student loan debt, we all know that forelongs a plan to purchase homes and become homeowners. Our ability to start families, as Chairwoman Bullock stated, our ability to generate wealth, create savings. When we talk about, again, making that 66 cents on a dollar, we're forced then to start our own businesses. But it is difficult to start our own business when we have stacks of student loan debt and still trying to, access capital in order to start those businesses. So, we're boxed in all around, but, there has been, ongoing conversation at every level of government to get a sense on how we tackle these issues. And here in the Commonwealth, we have several of our colleagues that have, introduced legislation, whether that be allowing student loan forgiveness based on the profession that you're in. We all know we have high rates of turnover in childcare, in healthcare, in education. So offering some type of financial incentive as it relates to student loans is one pathway. Another, I've introduced legislation to allow for companies that offer student loan forgiveness to take a tax credit, but then also not to penalize employees by having to report it as income. So there's a number of numerous policy recommendations being made here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And again, at every single level of government, we just all need to come together and really have a conversation as to what are the best policies to address it on a multifaceted way, not just those that, have currently have student loan debt or, have paid off their student debt, but, for future generations to come, how are we creating those guardrails so we don't create yet another generation that is saddled with this type of debt that will have a direct impact, not just on themselves and their ability to start families, but our economy and things like that. So thank you again for our panelists tonight. I'm extremely excited to see what policy recommendations you all are talking about so we can get to work here in the Commonwealth.
Thank you so kindly for your kind words. Everyone who knows me knows that I do begin and end with a quote. So since it's in we're ending with Women's History Month, I got to give a great quote from a phenomenal, brilliant woman. You should never view your challenges as a disadvantage. Instead, it's important for you to understand that your experience facing and overcoming adversity is actually one of your biggest advantage. And that is by our former First Lady, Michelle Obama. So since we're in the neighborhood of DC, let's just segue to our Congressman Evans, who can talk from his perspective. I love how this panel is set up. I had the financial side with Courtney and the congressman over here, our policy. So this actually is going to be a great discussion tonight. Congressman, please help us understand and unpack what is actually happening with the student loan debt, especially as it relates to African-American women of color. Thank you.
First, I'd like to thank you, your chairperson, who I was just with the other day at a roundtable for her leadership. Then I'd like to thank Morgan, who I was with also at Reverend Wallace Church, we discussed, and then your leadership on this event about women of color and the effect. Also, I want to thank some historical perspective and one women historically, the late Ruth Harper, who was a leader of the Pennsylvania Legislative Black Caucus, Roxanne Jones and Shirley Kitchen, who I knew those people directly and they led, so they also are part of. Look, in 2021, Pennsylvania ranked 6th in the country as far as states that had the most student debt. Student loan debt burdened more than 40 million Americans and prevents millions from buying homes, starting businesses, saving for retirement, or even starting business. This debt is disproportionately affect Black families and Black women in particular. Higher education has long been held as a critical path to economic opportunity and stability. But because of the long-standing systematic racial discrimination, Black families have far less wealth to draw on to pay for their college, creating barriers for Black communities to access higher education and build wealth. Black families are more likely to borrow more and to have trouble in repayment. According to the ACLU, 2 decades have taken out the student loan debt. The median Black borrowers still owe 95% of their debt, whereas the median white borrower has paid off 94% of their debt. Therefore, I've signed letters to President Biden asking for him to fulfill his promise to cancel substantial debt of student debts, as well as extending the student loan repayment pause beyond May. I've co-sponsored supporting America's Young Entrepreneur Act that would offer debt relief to student debt holders that launch businesses in economic depressed areas. I've also supported a bill to cancel student debt for the frontline workers. I support free community college. Let me repeat that. I'm a product of community college. Community college was the opportunity for me to have college. So if it was not community college, I would not have gone to college at all. So community college is very important. I support the broad cancellation of student loan debt. If you're talking about building wealth, if you're talking about building opportunity, if you do not deal with this debt burden, and it is very appropriate that you, Darisha, Donna, Morgan, taking this leadership at this very appropriate time on the last day of women's history, and particularly women of color. If you talk about families and talk about opportunities, until you deal with this debt, and it must be a collective effort, the state and the federal government together. Like this event that you're doing today, I'm certainly glad to join. The leader of the Congressional Black Caucus, Joyce Beatty, from the great state of Ohio, who's on the Financial Service Committee, and I was with her this morning. She shares the same feeling that you share. So it's only through this kind of effort that we must be relentless. We must stick with this. We need to understand if we're going to build wealth, we're going to build communities, and we're going to have families be able to take care of themselves, we must address this issue of debt. So I join with you, all of you, in this collective effort and add my voice to Donna, to Morgan, and Darisha in our leadership. Thank you very much.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. So when we're talking about money and we're talking about debt, I'm glad that we are joined by some financial gurus here today. And then as we talk to them, we're going to segue into the policy world. I did hear there's a doctor in the house, but the doctor that we all may not be aware of, this is the student loan doctor. Her name is Sonia Lewis, who's also going to be discussing some things with us. And also we cannot be remiss if we can't talk about our taxes and talk about these other type of pivotal things that are affecting women of color. That's why we also have Courtney here. So we're going to do a tag team between the student loan doctor and Courtney. Sonia, please explain, why are your phone and why is it such a crucial time that you have seen from the pandemic until now as we're talking about the topic of student loan debt? She got to unmute. There you go.
Okay, there we go. All right. Thank you so much for having me. And I see my good friend Courtney and some other good friends. So thank you so much, Congressman Evans, and all the representatives. Thank you so much for inviting me to the call. This conversation is very, very pertinent to not just Black women, but to all Americans. Because if as Black women, we are not financially successful, no one in this country is successful. And so I'm very excited about the topic, very passionate. Obviously, I started a whole business around it because one of the things that I've seen as a businesswoman helping people understand their student loan debt, particularly in these pandemic times, is that the conversation has been, no one's coming to save you. No one's coming to help you. No one's coming to aid you with your student loan debt. So what I've noticed in the pandemic is that there was a false hope and expectation that student loan debt was going to be just wiped away. And that was even what was almost kind of said in the Biden administration, what they ran off of, if you will, 10,000, 50,000, right? And it's been 2 years, so we're a little concerned here. I think the question has to become, particularly for Black women, when we are looking to go back to the polls, what has been done, what has not been done. And we really, I think we have to leverage our vote a little differently with our student loan debt in mind.
Thank you so kindly. Courtney, you know you're going to have to weigh in from your tax perspective and tell me what the finances that you have seen from pretty much, let's do it 2019 until now, as we're talking about the debt, because I know you can give us a better view from your financial lens.
Absolutely. And thank you again for having us and having this conversation, which is very much necessary, especially at this time. From what I have been seeing from 2019 to current is that I think Sonia hit the nail on the head by saying the expectation was that these things were going to go away. And I think with that understanding, that expectation, a lot of people have, for the most part, since the beginning of the pandemic, ignored their student loans, which is okay, given that for the most part people were not going to be penalized. However, now that it's kind of coming around full circle 2 years later, Not much has changed. And the thing is, and then we were talking about this before the conversation started, is that a lot of women have been leaving the workforce for multitudes of reasons. And what that does, if they have student loan debt and they're leaving the workforce, it really does cripple them. Student loan debt acts as a specter over every single aspect of a woman's life. And it continues. And the thing is that for the most part, student loan debts are gone. As long as they're federal, they go away at death. But if it's a private student loan, it doesn't even go away in death. You can't even get rid of it. So, and again, these conversations are not had with an 18-year-old, a 25-year-old. I mean, they're so willing to get the education because we have always been taught in our community that education is basically the key to freedom. And I love Congressman Evans' commentary about community college. My mom had an associate's degree in nursing, and she was able to have a substantial nursing career. But it's very different now. You know, I mean, we say that a bachelor's degree is akin to a high school degree than it was 20, 30 years ago. And we kind of move up the ladder. So that kind of starts the snowball of us getting more student loan debt, but we're actually not getting, as an investment person, ROI, or return on our investment. The investment, we're coming up with a negative ROI. So the question is, where do we go from there? So not only are we getting negative ROI because we're underemployed, but also we're making less money than we should in comparison to our white counterparts. So then there's another gap. And then the next question is, how do we then, if we're now in a double hole, how do we then pass generational wealth to our families if we don't have any wealth there? You have your net worth. Your net worth is your assets minus your liabilities, and that gives you your net worth. Well, if your assets are, we'll say 50,000, but your student loan debt is $250,000. You're $200,000 in the hole. And that's a regular issue and continuing issue that I've seen over the last couple of years, and it's not getting any better. And it really seems that a lot of people, you know, were able to kind of make the pandemic come up, but that's not what happened for an average everyday American. So I think those rag to riches stories are really overshadowing the truth.
Attitude, we're talking about rags and the riches. Congressman Evans probably is going about to smile because we can't have this discussion if we don't talk about policy. So I'm glad that we have Barbara Price, who is the public policy chair of the Pennsylvania chapter of the American Association of University of Women. And it's also a great honor to have Thomas from the Urban League. So I'm looking at the clock, and I know we can do this, and this is going to be a great time right here. Let's talk about, and please unpack for us, Barbara, and then we can pass it over to Thomas, policy. Give us your perspective, because you gave some great data, some percentages and some point. Please unpack basically what we've been talking about thus far from a policy perspective.
Thank you very much. We've made great progress since my organization, AAUW, was founded in 1881 with the mission of advancement of women in higher education. Women are now the majority of students in college in the United States, and students from a variety of racial and ethnic backgrounds are better represented on campus. But while college has become a more diverse place, it's also become more expensive. Since 1987, there has been a 103% increase in the price of a college education, while median household income has only increased 14%. As a result, student loans are filling the gap. Americans now owe $1.7 trillion in student loan debt, the second largest category of debt in the United States, second only to home mortgages. Women take on greater debt than men to start, but when women graduate, loan payments collide with the gender pay gap. The compounding effect puts a tight squeeze on women's budgets. While many people talk about the challenges associated with student loan debt, few people have examined the role of gender and race in how much debt students take on. Women hold almost 2/3 of student loan debt, or about $1.1 trillion. Breaking down the average debt of students graduating with a bachelor's degree by both gender and race shows substantial differences. Though women overall tend to take on more debt than men, Black women have the largest average debt of any group of bachelor's degree graduates. Cumulative debt on Black women's undergraduate loans, including principal and interest, 1 year after graduation is $41,466. Most studies and data focus on students who graduate, but many college students never complete an academic program. Those who leave college without a degree may still have student loan debt, but without the increased earnings potential that comes with a degree. These students are much more likely to default on their loans than students who graduate. Other risk factors for student loan default include having a lower income or family income while enrolled and being a single parent. Women make up 71% of all student parents, married and single, and 43% of them are single mothers. For both women and men, possessing a college degree is associated with much higher pay. However, women graduate to an immediate 7% wage gap with men. As the wage gap continues, it's 21% for all women in Pennsylvania and 33% for Black women. It means less income to devote to debt repayment. In the time period between 1 and 4 years after graduation, men paid off an average of 38% of their student debt, while women paid off only 31%. Women take about 2 years longer than men to repay student loans and are more likely to struggle economically as they do so. 57% of Black women report financial difficulties while repaying student loans, such as being unable to afford all essential expenses sometime during the year. Another major contributing factor to student loan debt is the high cost of a college education. Students attend a variety of institutions. However, most students attend public institutions, community colleges, four-year institutions offering bachelor's and graduate degrees. Analyzing the rising cost of college over the 2008 to 2018 period, after adjusting for inflation, per student funding in Pennsylvania fell by more than 30% over this period. Tuition and fees at Pennsylvania's public colleges have gone up 66% since 2001 after adjusting for inflation. And these rising costs have resulted in a decline in attendance of low and middle income students and a crushing amount of debt for those who do attend. In 2019 to 20, 64% of Pennsylvania college graduates had student loan debt, placing the state third highest nationally on this measure. The average debt load of a Pennsylvania college graduate as of June 2, 2020 was $39,375. Tuition and fees now account for nearly 3/4 of educational costs at the Pennsylvania system of schools, compared to half that level, 37% in 1983 or 84. Total costs have gone from 1/5 of median family income to over 1/3. 39% of Pennsylvania college student loan debt is non-federal debt, which is often costlier and carries fewer consumer protections than federal debt. The largest component of this non-federal debt is private student loans, debt that students borrow from banks and private lenders. In Pennsylvania, 22% of college graduates have private student debt with an average private debt load of $42,361. The student debt crisis both reflects and exacerbates the racial wealth gap in the United States. The typical white family in the US has 8 times the wealth of the typical Black family. These disparities are reflected in students' expected family contribution, the amount of money that the US Department of Education believes a student or a family has available to pay for a student's post-secondary education. Having less family wealth to rely on means borrowing more to finance higher education. More than 70% of Black students go into debt for higher education compared to 56% of white students. And then there's COVID. New research by the Student Debt Crisis Center and Savvy, a social impact technology company that helps borrowers get student loan forgiveness, found that 95% of Black borrowers are not prepared to resume payments on May 1st. 61% of respondents who could easily afford their student loan payments before the COVID-19 pandemic began are either struggling to make payments, cannot make payments, or are in default. Over half of borrowers say their student loan servicer has not contacted them to say that federal student loan payments are set to resume on May 1st. And over half of borrowers lost their job, had reduced hours, or were furloughed due to the COVID-19 pandemic. So what can we do? This growing crisis requires two responses: helping those who have untenable outstanding debt and putting the right support into place to stem the accrual of such massive debt in the first place. We need to cancel student loan debt in an equitable way. Rising higher education expenses mean that students, notably women, and especially women of color, are responsible for significantly greater out-of-pocket expenses that are not covered by grant aid. Several executive and congressional proposals for student debt forgiveness would help those who are struggling, but any debt cancellation plan must be intentional and equitable. Forgiveness should extend to all borrowers without regard to income, default status, repayment plan, industry sector, or institution attended. This will ensure that the neediest borrowers, low income and low wealth individuals, are not inadvertently excluded. We also need to simplify the repayment approaches. Income-driven repayment plans, IDRs, are crucial to customize loan payments to reflect borrowers' economic circumstances. The myriad programs, however, can be confusing to navigate. Streamlining IDR programs and making it easier for individuals to enroll would improve outcomes for women who are struggling to repay their loans. And last but not least, and I shouldn't say last, but another thing we really need to do is eliminate the pay gap. The pay gap plays a major role in the student debt burden on women. Policymakers must commit to ending gender-based pay discrimination by passing and updating laws, such as the Paycheck Fairness Act at the federal level to close existing loopholes, and pass Representative Bullock's legislation here in Pennsylvania. This would deter discrimination by streamlining penalties for equal pay violations, banning the use of salary history in the hiring process, and prohibiting retaliation against workers who inquire about employers' wage practices or disclose their own wages. Another thing we need to do is to support future borrowers. At the federal level, we need to expand and increase Pell Grants. The federal Pell Grants are critical to many students' success in higher education, but the program's purchasing power is the lowest it's been in decades. Congress must ensure that eligibility is expanded to include more families, and the maximum Pell Grant is doubled and indexed to inflation to ensure aid covers a greater share of the total cost of college attendance. We also should pass the Child Care Access Means Parents in Schools Act. Parents must navigate the challenging demands of college work with the demands of providing care for their children. The C-Campus program provides vital support for the participation and success of low-income parents in post-secondary education through the provision of subsidized childcare, which is widely recognized as one of the most important supports for parenting college students. We also need to invest in public education. Dramatic tuition increases are partially attributable to deep cuts in state funding for colleges and universities. This was particularly true after the Great Recession, and higher education budgets have not recovered, placing the burden on the backs of students and their families. States need to prioritize investments in higher education with a focus on lowering college costs for low and moderate income students. Critically, federal dollars must be used to supplement, not supplant, state investments. Also, it would be great if we could make student loans more easily discharged through bankruptcy. And last but not least, we should support the Nellie Bly scholarships Governor Wolf has proposed in his budget to cover the gap between Pell Grants and college costs. Thank you.
I was about to say, I don't know if I should get a glass of water or a glass of wine, because that was a lot that you laid on all of us, and you have covered every branch of government with the exception of city council. So I feel like we need to just take your portion and do the advocacy piece with Congressman Evans, our US Senate, and our state reps and our state senators, and get this stuff done. So we're gonna put a pencil there, because we now gotta make sure I let the other brothers speak. Thomas from the Urban League. So after you heard what Barbara laid out compared to everyone, give us a little bit more as from the policy perspective from what the Urban League is doing as far as the student loan debt.
No, definitely. Thank you very much. And I'll probably just be adding a few points because Barbara definitely was comprehensive with some of those policy recommendations. The Urban League, we've been working with the Center for Responsible Lending, along with the NAACP, the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights. One of the things we did notice was that even many folks who have student loan debt, sometimes it's only $10,000, and they're still defaulting on that small number. So we do recognize that even reducing that amount of debt is critical. I think something else that wasn't mentioned that's important to think about is identifying the right institutions that will support your college, your career goals. We know, unfortunately, many of our community had to leverage for-profit institutions that sometimes don't have the same academic credentialing, don't have the same success record, and don't have the same supports in terms of federal loan debt, and thus many in our community had suffered from that. But it's a tricky situation, especially when you think about Black women, their goal of trying to get higher education. Sometimes if they're parents, they have to think about flexible ways of trying to pursue a degree. So they may find themselves being appealed to those types of programs. And sometimes if they don't complete the program, then they don't have the same credentialing to help them navigate, their original goal. So I do think we, along with all the recommendations that Barbara mentioned, we do want to think about what are the institutions that we're picking and how do we make sure that it is putting us on a path to success. And, and it also has the securities on the back end to protect us if it's a situation that we don't complete our degree, that we do find ourselves still not burdened to the same level. And that could include looking at community colleges that maybe allow you to have your associate degree so that if you can't move on to a bachelor's degree, you can at least fall back on that associate and figure out a career based off of that as you continue to think about that college degree. So I think that's something that we do want to be mindful when we think about our African-American community, that, unfortunately, for-profit institutions have had a negative impact on our Black women and Black families, and has caused sometimes some unfortunate debt. We did see the federal government have to come in and try to provide some debt relief for those that have been impacted by attending for-profit institutions. And that has, we see that effect. So I think that's something to always keep in mind when we think about this change in higher education landscape. If folks are thinking about going to college, in some instances, there was this sense of like you had to go to the most expensive school, and folks are now looking at that and thinking, what is the return on investment if I went to this more expensive school? Was it worth it in the long run when we think about this current work environment? Folks are maybe thinking differently about where they're picking schools, because they may have to think about, if a job isn't a guarantee at the end of 4 years, do I also at least protect myself from not having $200,000 in debt because I attended a school that didn't give me that return on investment?
Thank you for definitely saying that. And I'm real quick, and then I'm gonna pass it to our chairwoman. There was a consultation that we gave a few years ago for a family who was so excited that their daughter got accepted to Vassar. At that time, it was $70,000. I repeat, it was $70,000. We broke everything down and asked, how are you going to pay for it? Oh, we're going to pay for it. We're going to be fine. We're going to be fine. She only lasted 1 semester. She's back home on her parents' couch with a job. So it goes back to what Thomas says, when you're trying to give the individual all of these options. They did not have a full scholarship for the Ivy League shoot. She had a full scholarship ride at Howard. Instead, she wanted to go to the Ivy League school with that high debt to this day that they are still paying back. Chairwoman, take it away.
Thank you, Rep Parker. And you kind of making me a little afraid here, because I got two sitting in my house that'll be in college in 4 and 6 years. So I got to get ready. First, I got to pay my own debt off, right? I got to pay my own student loan debt off. And by the time I finish, I'll start paying for them. I was very impressed with the information that was shared so far. I have a number of questions for a couple of our panelists. And I wanted to start with our congressman, because I know his time may be limited with us. Congressman Evans, we've heard that this the forbearance and the payment pause for student loans will be ending on May 1st. What has your office been doing, or any of our federal elected officials or U.S. Department of Education doing to let folks know you got to start paying back your loans soon? And how can we be helpful in that effort?
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. I think that this discussion that Darisha is handling is why this discussion needs to take place, because in my view, currently, those are only short-term measures. If you notice what I said, I support the broad cancellation of student debt. And you heard from your guest, Barbara, where she talked about that needs to be a policy implementation. If you're talking about addressing the inequities, particularly in the Black community and Black women, there needs to be a policy that affects, you just use yourself as an example, and you have your 2 children as an example. I mean, there's no way you're going to be able to compete in this situation with that type of debt. And if you also notice what your person, Barbara, said, she talked about the inequities relating to income in terms of the price that Black women pay versus the price that white women pay. You could talk about President Obama and Michelle Obama, when they said they just got out of debt when, after he was president, he was just winding down in terms of the time that he was president. So here's a person who became president of the United States, first lady of the United States, and look at the implications on them. So I share with you that. So them policies discussions that Darisha talked about are fundamentally where we need to function. And the support of the broad cancellation is where. Now, I have gone on record with a number of my colleagues to the president, raising our voices in this discussion, because you will never address the issues in this country if you don't address this debt. So this discussion you're having is the way it has to bring the consciousness. And the part about, I said, I think someone said about, the reason I advocate about community college is because community college, I can tell you when it started. Community college started like 1967 in Philadelphia. Community college was an avenue for me, because the 4-year school I went to was LaSalle, but it was a vehicle. And that's why I said that community college is the way, as an avenue, knowing that you need to have additional education, either a degree, either a certificate, either trade, whatever, that based on the economy. So it's that kind of analysis, Donna, it's that kind of analysis, which I think this conversation is good, that you have to do the drill down. You have to do the drill down, and it's done at the state, it's done. The last thing on the Pell Grant, we just in this budget, Pell Grant was increased, and Bobby Scott, who's the chairman, he's from Virginia, who's the chairman on it, has been a strong advocate about the infusion of increasing the Pell Grant. So one of the things I want to say to you is that the Congressional Black Caucus, under Joyce Beatty leadership, under Bobby Scott leadership, I share with you, this space is something that they have taken on, we have taken collectively on. So I share with you, we're working in that progress. I stress to you that we need to work in conjunction together.
Thank you. And this may be another question for you, Congressman, or perhaps Barbara. Barbara mentioned the C Campus grant, and I recall us having that here in Philadelphia. It was hosted, or the organization that managed that grant here in Philadelphia is an organization called Family Care Solutions, and it provided childcare assistance and scholarships to students who had children so that they can attend class. So Barbara, is that grant no longer existing? Is it something we need to renew? Or I'm not sure if the congressman can chime in here, if Barbara wanted to jump in.
I'm not sure that it does it. It probably needs to be reauthorized, and the grants have to come again. However, I do know that some colleges, I live in Bucks County, and our community college here offers childcare to their students. I don't know that they have a grant for it, but they've been doing it for some time, you know. And the other thing they do is they also have a food bank for students. And I know Morgan has sponsored legislation about that. And I know Westchester also offers a food bank at their college. So some colleges are taking that up even without money, but you know, again, these are things that we need to think about. People can't go to school if they're hungry, and they need to have support, you know. And while I have the moment here, I want to reiterate what Thomas said about these private places. We had a woman here in Bucks County that I read about just a year or so ago, and she had gone to one of these private institutions to learn to be a sonogram technician. And she had checked, and the school was a certified provider. They were certified in certain things. They weren't certified in sonograms, but she didn't know that because they said they were certified by the federal government, you know. And so she graduated as a sonogram technician, couldn't get a job because the program wasn't certified. She owes $35,000 in student debt and can't get the job that she trained to do to pay it off. So, you know, I'm glad he brought that up because that's one of the issues. And our Department of Education here in Pennsylvania just said that DeVry Institute had to forgive student loans. So, you know, there's a lot of that stuff, and people just don't know about these things, you know. And I think, and Thomas was saying that too, that people just don't think about a lot of this stuff. They have no idea, you know, even with this new moratorium, the moratorium was supposed to be on interest too. And one of the people who serves on our state committee owes $200,000 in student loans. She was very happy not to pay for 2 years, but guess what? They still accrued her interest. So now she's got to, you know, check into that. So there's always something, you know, that they seem to be able to not manage well. That's my soapbox. I'm sorry.
I piggyback the entire debate you have heard on understand the president's approach on building back better. His approach was the American Rescue Plan, the infrastructure plan, and building back better. It was a three-pronged approach. And the Building Back Better initiative, which did pass the House, that did not pass the Senate, was this issue about debt relief was a part of the discussion about building back better. And if you recall, the president was a strong advocate for a free community college. You recall that was on the list. And you recall the child tax credit, which I sit on the Ways and Means Committee, was a temporary basis, but needed to be permanent. So the child tax credit and the aspect of building back better. So if you take the approach that the president was taking, is with this pandemic and the health disparities it was having about people of color, and particularly poor Black women, that fundamentally you could see the inadequacies was occurring. So this policy discussion of American Rescue Infrastructure and Building Back Better was an attempt to restructure some of the things that you are discussing here. And that's what the debate is about now. That's where we are. So Donna, for what you're talking about, that is a discussion that's happening right now. So community college, if you recall, was a part of it. It's not an accident that his wife, the first lady, teaches at a community college. And understand that connection. The first lady taught at community college, the president for free community college. That wasn't an accident. That was in a policy debate. And then the cancellation of debt, which a group of us had written the president about that. So these things are in the mix. Now I'm gonna tell you what these things are connected to. Voting. November. That's where it is. All these things are on the ballot in the primary and the general election. So the discussion you have right now, this is on the ballot. This is on the ballot in November and the primary. So when voter goes to vote, you need to correspond the aspect of their voting with the outcome of these discussions, Donna. The late John Lewis, that Dr. Martin Luther King used to call the boy from Troy. The boy from Troy. Why was he leading that charge with President Johnson about voting rights? There's a connection between voting rights and debt cancellation. Child tax credit. And Cory Booker has an initiative about putting deposits for children, which they do it in London, a down payment for people, like for deposit. So all these kinds of policies, Donna, are the family cares infrastructure, not just the physical infrastructure, but the family care infrastructure. Because all of these initiatives together, if you're talking about societal-wise addressing these issues and addressing the inadequacies that are between the races and what's happening, these are the things that you got to get in place. And these are things about voting. These are things about participating. All these things are interconnected to voting and voting participation.
Thank you, Congressman Evans. And just real quick, I wanted to see if you can answer this question. Is there anything in the works for private student loan debt? Because most of the forgiveness programs have been for government student loans. Do you know of anything that your colleagues are working on private student loans?
I'm not necessarily aware off the top of my head. You talking about private? I'm not, I don't know if Barbara knows. I'm not off the top of my head.
Yeah.
From private.
I think you're right. Most of the legislative efforts have been in regards to public student loan debt. Rep. Cephas may know of anything in the state level.
Yeah, I wanted to jump in just really quickly. Just not that there's, I mean, I don't have anything specific to that question, but is there any way, I guess, as we start, you know, having other policy conversations that have banks connecting to federal resources, to use that as an opportunity to incentivize them to look at ways to address student loan debt that's private loans. So for example, when we saw COVID-19 and the federal government sent significant dollars through privately owned banks, that potentially could have been used as leverage to address private student loan debt. Like we're only pushing money through banks that are going to work with us to strategize for students that have some debt. So is there any way that on a congressional level with Build Back Better or any future policies that involve sending taxpayer dollars through banks to use that as a carrot to get them to start strategizing around this issue?
You know, it's not an accident that two of the best Black women you have, Joyce Beatty from Ohio, who's on financial service, and Maxine Waters, who is the chair of what you're talking about. She's the chair, and Joyce Beatty's on that committee. So I say that Donna, as chair of Pennsylvania, I mean, Maxine from California, Joyce Beatty from Ohio. I mean, this kind of thing that you're doing, you, Darisha, and, it needs to be this kind of larger discussion, because, you know, this is not just a challenge for Pennsylvania, it's the whole nation, right? It's the whole nation. And one of the things I share with you that I talk a lot about, which I'll pivot just a little bit, is trade is connected, right, to African countries, things of that nature. So it's this, I applaud you again for this kind of conversation. And we need to use our collective effort together. And, you know, there's the National Conference of Black State Legislators, you know, Donna. So it's that, with Joyce Beatty as the chair of the Congressional Black Caucus. It's that kind of effort. You know, it's 55 members are part of the Congressional Black Caucus. And I think the vast majority, if not correct, are African-American women. So I share with you that, you know, with Joyce Beatty, Maxine Waters, it's worthwhile question, you know, you as chair and Morgan, you know, from a Pennsylvania perspective, can have a larger discussion about some of these questions I may not be able to answer.
Thank you, Congressman, and we'll partner right with you, and we'll make sure we get it done in the next couple of months.
Right, we will. Thank you. I have one more question, Rep. Parker, for our professionals in the space, Courtney and Sonia. Hearing all of the policy recommendations that came through today's conversation and what you've seen in the last 2 years, what are the kind of policies or benefits that you see your clients taking the most advantage of? And how can, you know, what are the things you think we should be extending or looking deeper into to better assist the clients that walk into your doors?
Well, I'll definitely kick off. I think everything that was said today is so timely and relevant. And I almost want to, you know, duplicate the entire conversation again for my clients at large. And so we serve unapologetically, I would say, African-American women nationwide. We have a huge community that have gravitated towards us because the one thing that we've always been upfront and talked to them about is, you know, these are the rules. These are the things that you need to know. These are things you need to do. These are things you need to be aware of. And I think the challenge sometimes in our community, if I can be very honest with you, is that there is sometimes false information, oversaturated information. There's no trust in the system. The system has failed them many a times when you talk about student loan debt or loan forgiveness. And just as Ms. Price has shared, you know, is there interest accruing? Is there not? And we've had to help a lot of people with interest accruing. And one of the things that I think is going to be really exciting to see as the Biden administration, just on a national level, leans more into public service loan forgiveness, that they're actually doing something right in that space and that they're cleaning up that program. And so between now and 2023, if you had just simply applied for the program, right? And you may have been told no before, because there are a lot of reasons people have been told no, or lenders have been uneducated. We have been seeing so many people have great success with getting their loans 100% forgiven in a matter of 30 days. And so what I would like to see on a not only on a federal level, but at state level and a local level, I would love to see more programming, more workshops, more conversations at the job, at the nonprofits in which people work. I would love to see more informational sessions, tangible sessions that people could attend and practical. Hold their hand to do the paperwork, because so many people were told no before, or they doubted the process, that they are now eligible and they're just not going to take advantage of it because, oh no, that I don't get forgiven. I tried years ago. Literally, we heard that many a times, and 30 days later they're crying and screaming because it went through. So I think that we at the core level, for all the things we talked about, let's utilize the programs that are in place, and let's do more granular work if we could, to walk people, almost like hold their hand, lunch and learns, you know, and see people really win with the things that the current administration is cleaning up and doing well.
And if I could quickly add, I did put in our chat, and I'll make sure to add it to the Facebook feed. There's actually a summary of what those changes are that the National Urban League has compiled, so that people can quickly see what those changes are and follow. So it's definitely important, as Sonia mentioned, to make sure that you're staying abreast of these changes, because as politics, as we recognize, different administrations can change how policies may be perceived or how policies are implemented, even if the larger policy title may not have changed. The implementation can be at the purview of administration. So this current climate allows us to take advantage of those changes, and hopefully they remain permanent for many. But if not, you want to make sure that you lock it in now, so that if it changes again, you don't lose out.
That's a great point, Tomas. I think to kind of piggy off what Sonia shared, I think really focusing on education, I really have noticed with clients that I work with clients just kind of in general talking about investing and understanding investments. But also I have a lot of estate clients, and the educational side is really lacking in terms of what's forgivable, what's not forgivable when someone passes away, and what responsibilities do borrowers have after someone passes away. Because, you know, in the midst of grieving, you know, we have a lot of other things that go on, and things get, you know, lost in the cracks. I mean, we've seen a couple of times where private student loan, and this is pre-pandemic, but they've gotten very aggressive and actually placed liens on properties, you know, because again, you know, those funds are still due and owing even after death. So education and honestly, the hand holding is really important. A lot of people are afraid of talking about finances, talking about responsibilities, and ultimate to the point that they are just, you know, not moving at all. Even those, to Sonia's point, who have the opportunity to get their loans forgiven under this new kind of cleanup of the public service loan forgiveness programs, they're just too afraid to do anything. So again, it's that, you know, kind of understanding and trusting the system again, because a lot of people feel that the system, you know, and part of it is the conversation of, are we going to forgive or are we not going to forgive, has let them down. So that's one thing. The other side is the way that we calculate interest rates on student loans. I mean, I think one thing that we've seen over time is that, you know, the way and the amount that interest accrues over time can basically bury someone. You know, it's that once you have the principal, you're like, okay, I can manage that. But as time goes on and that interest accrues, I mean, there's so many, especially when it comes to Black students, when you look to see that they've actually paid more than what they borrowed. You know, I mean, it's disheartening, but it's also just not fair. And I think, you know, when we put fairness back in the system, I think we can get a lot further. And then finally, just incentivizing people saving for the future. I know that we have the retirement savings credit, but it's not really, the income level is still relatively low. And then when you have student loan debt, you only get the interest forgiven up to a certain amount. And I think it's 75,000. I think it gets increased every so often. But even still, is that you have people who are making, you know, over 75,000 that are still paying back a lot of money in loans, and they're not getting any relief on the tax side. So, and then on the other side, you know, you're saying, okay, well, if you make over a certain amount, no, you can't contribute to a Roth IRA. So there's a lot of things that I think have these artificial caps in terms of salary, and we really need to take a look at those. So those are the things that I think, you know, education, fixing the way interest accrues on these loans, and then also incentivizing retirement and kind of taking off some of these caps to give people relief that they need on the tax side, I think is really important.
Thank you both, Courtney and Sonia and Tomas, for jumping in on that question. I think The thing I took away from that is having trusted professionals, trusted educators, people from the community like you, folks that are going to, you know, connect with the borrowers, connect with our community and educate them so that they can trust the information that they are receiving and be able to make the decisions and sound decisions as they try to manage their student loans and their taxes and planning, retirement planning. So I appreciate you sharing that information and the work that you all do in your respective spaces and businesses. Thank you, Rep. Parker. I have no further questions, and you can take it from here unless Rep. Cephas or someone else has a question.
All I can say is I did not know when a firecracker, my married name is Parker, but the fire came in because my maiden name is Miller. When I penned this opinion letter demanding that our President Biden and VP Kamala Harris cancel student debt, that we would end here. And I don't want this conversation just to be here. I need this conversation to go on the road, because as our congressman said, that we have to make this discussion national. So we will be partnering with his office and everybody else on here so we can have a national discussion that we don't want people to say a pause. We need it canceled. Because when people do better, that means the economy does better, because they're able to put more money into the household budget, not buy a pair of red bottom shoes, but to do things for their family, their friends, their loved ones, and to invest in sometimes political offices to make sure other people and policy is passed out forward. We can't just have this discussion here. We have to make sure we take it on the road, and we got to look at what are the resources that are here that are not confusing. I even went on the link to try to figure out which one is forgivable, not forgivable. It was confusing to me. So I know there's other people that are confusing, and then you get embarrassed to say who is a trusted source to ask. Well, I got a trusted source on this Zoom tonight that we're extremely happy and proud to say that we have them on speed dial. So I'm thinking we got to do this again, and we're going to have to do it in person in partnership with our Congress staff to make sure that we have people on hand, as Courtney shared, along with Sonia, that they literally going to be showing them how to fill out the paperwork properly, how to make sure they understand what Barbara discussed and how we talked about from an urban league's perspective what time is. So I'm just saying, wow, wow, wow. I'm definitely cannot close out, but I'll give it to my sister, who also is my rep and was a great friend and a mentor. I call her my big sis. We're not going to talk about my age, but anyway, I'm going to pass it to State Rep Morgan Cephas.
No, thank you for that. And thank you to, everybody that was a part of tonight's discussion and just shining light on, just the overall issue, but, a pathway to, help address this student loan debt crisis, whether that be, policy levels on the local level, the state level, or the federal level. I think we all coming together can really strategize and tackle this issue, again, in a multifaceted way. One, to help protect and provide some relief for those that have already taken out massive loans of debt. And I know Chairwoman Bullock talked about it. I mean, I have my own student loan debt that has, forced me to prolong a laundry list of decisions. But, making sure that we have policies that address that group. And to Barbara's point, not to put one group versus another, but really to overhaul the entire system to address every single individual that has taken out debt, but then also providing those guardrails for future generations so they're not having to tackle the same challenges that we are tackling. And, really just to close out tonight's conversation, as we celebrate Women's Month, again, we celebrate the accomplishments, we celebrate the progress, but we still have so much further to go. And, let this be, to Representative Parker's point, a kickoff for a conversation to drive home that this is an issue and a topic that Black women will stay on. And as you ask us to go to the polls, we will be asking you, what have you done for us, since being in office around the issues that impact us the most? So, I thank you all for joining tonight's conversation. And, here's to canceling student loan debt.
Thank you, Congressman Evans, my chairwoman, Courtney, Barbara, student loan, Sonia, and Thomas. And of course, tonight's staff. I see there's some comments in the chat, but I know I got to end with another quote. So I think we on a roll since Congressman is in DC. Hope in the face of difficulty. Hope in the face of uncertainty. The audacity of hope in the end, that is God's greatest gift to us. The bedrock of this nation, a belief in things not seen, a belief that there are better days ahead. That's by our former president, Barack Obama. I have to say thank you to all. Thank you. And this is our first, but not our last, discussion of the urgency of canceling student loan debt. Thank you, Chairwoman, for this honor, for being here. And I thank you for my support. For everybody, we love you. Please, 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 please hear us as we're talking about canceling student loan debt is a priority that we need to continue to make this an advocacy and an action mission. Good night.